this is what I'm going to try to show off. I have very little time to show off all these demos. So we'll see how well I do. So first of all, raise your hand if you have never heard of GraphQL before. I think we have a pretty seasoned room here. I think everyone has seen this. Raise your hand if you have seen the GraphQL Explorer over here. All right, fewer hands. All right, so first bit of magic. Let's make some magic happen. So the thing is, GraphQL is really, really cool. The problem is, once you learn GraphQL and you like GraphQL, you no longer have the ability to empathize with someone who doesn't know GraphQL. So what happens is, you give this to someone, and you're like, this is the most amazing tool in the world. Try this. And they type something, and they're not like, oh, open? Is that what is that, right? It's like they don't know GraphQL. And so you kind of dump them into this blank canvas. So what you really want to do is approach them as a human, right? I know that your API has some data that I want, and I want to be able to explore it. So what we do here is we use the introspection schema, and rather than auto-completing, we just kind of show you like a file system here. So I can come in here and I see, oh, there's a Spotify, and I can just kind of click through and I see search, and I say maybe win. That's what I'm feeling, all right? All right, and now I see under search, there's some tracks. So any tracks that match that query, their ID and their name. I'll go ahead and run that. And I have some data coming back. So I can kind of easily explore any GraphQL API. And this is open source. You can point this at any GraphQL server, and you'll get this experience. And now maybe I want to say, well, this is cool, right? But it's kind of hard-coded to my query. I mean, it's cool. I assume all of you want to search for win. That's what you all feel like right now. But maybe you want to variabilize this. And a lot of people don't know, how do you use variables in GraphQL? And it's kind of a lot of work, right? Like, I only have one hand if I'm holding the mic. So what I'm going to do here is hover over, and it notices, it says, hey, this thing could be a variable if you wanted to. So what I'm going to do is just click on this. It'll turn it into a variable. So now this is parameterized. If I decide I didn't want that, I'll just click on it again, go back. But maybe I actually want to give the user of this the ability to just search for everything. So I'll go ahead and parameterize all of data. So it'll parameterize that. So I'm just kind of come through here, and I can quickly chop up my query, and it's very nice. So I'm going to call this one search. And of course, querying is great. It's great to be able to read data from an API, but the best parts of API are the ones that do effects for us, right? The ones that change the world, both metaphorically and literally. All right, so what we're going to do here is I want to keep going down this road. So I want to pause. I see there's Spotify, and I see here are all the actions. Here's what Spotify's API can do for me. It can pause my player, it can play, it can resume. Seems pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. This is going to reach out into the Spotify API. It's going to modify that player. It's going to pause it and return to me the new state of that player. So I want to say, having paused you, are you playing? I certainly hope not, right? That's the whole point of this effect. And I'll go ahead and pull out the progress, and that seems good. And I want to do a few more, right? I kind of feel like I'm building this player, right? I mean, I'm able to search for songs. I'm able to pause my player. I probably want to have a few more operations. So what I'm going to do is just copy this operation over here, and I'll call this resume. And now that I don't want to pause a player, I want to resume my player. But unfortunately, I lost all my selections, right? Pause, I already went through and I filled out the fields that I want. So I'll do this one more time. And what I'm going to say is I actually want to turn this into a fragment, which is what allows me to actually share this across different operations. So now if I go back into my pause, I see, hey, this is a fragment. So we check the AST of this query, and we saw that this fragment is actually applicable here. So rather than you hard coding these fields, why don't you just use the fragment? So this is looking pretty good. I'll do one more here, which is going to be next. Same idea. Rather than pausing or resuming, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next track. And then I'm going to get my modified player. So now, just kind of clicking around with one hand, I was able to explore an API, add operations, rename them. And now I have like a little kind of a sort of janky, but like a pretty cool little Spotify player, which is nice. So this is all open source. It's really cool. It's one of the biggest wins we've had for kind of teaching people GraphQL. Right? Because whenever you don't know the syntax, as soon as you know the syntax, you're like, man, that's really cool. it's like JSON, but like not really. It's like only half of it. It's kind of, if you squint, it's kind of cool. And like, if you don't know that, you're like, what the hell is that? Is that Lisp? What's going on? Like, you want to have something that's actually a little bit more explorable. So the Explorer has, that's why we call it the Explorer. It lets you actually look through an API. So now I have all these operations. I'm able to go through here and I can actually modify my player and search and whatnot. And this was a really big success for us, right? We had people who didn't know GraphQL who were able to explore APIs and run queries. Cool. The problem is, once you've gotten to here, what's the next step, right? People don't come to GraphQL to get their data from GraphQL. They want to actually use this in some sort of usable context, like their code. And so for us, it was like, well, maybe go learn React and Apollo and come back in a few weeks, hopefully, which is not like a really good answer. And the problem is, if you are an API provider and someone is trying to use your API, they are desperate for some form of success, right? They're going to cobble together whatever they can get to just barely work. And as soon as it works, they're going to move on. No matter what warts or problems were there, they're like, my job is done. It's good to go. And the next time that someone comes and needs to do something else with your API, the job's already done, right? Someone did that. So they're going to copy and paste all those warts into another file. And all those bad ideas are going to go everywhere. So what you want to do as an API provider who knows the best way to use your API is kind of embed it inside of your tooling and make it so that the easy thing, which is copy and paste, is the right thing. So what we do here is we actually analyze the AST. I'll run that one more time. And we actually generate a full program, a full React app in this case, that will generate a component for each one of these operations. And each of them has the authorization and everything built in. And I know that you guys are probably not super into like React Apollo. I know everyone is here to obviously see the bash version of that, right? Everyone wants to be able to control Spotify from the bash. And I can't really read bash, but that looks right to me. But you know, we'll go into JavaScript. And the cool thing is a lot of people, so we see a lot of people who don't know GraphQL at all. And so we want to teach them a lot of good practices, but we want to do it very gently. So for example, a lot of people don't know that you can name your operations. So if I delete that, what we do is we actually generate a super nice exception right here. Let me go ahead and do that. So we generate very shortly. This is on my local development. And we'll do one more time. All right. Let's see if that worked. I have a backup. Hold on. All right. We'll go to OneGraph. So I'll do this on a actual production one. So we'll throw this in there. Copying and pasting with one hand. Give me 1 second. Here we go. And there we go. All right, cool. So I'm going to go to this code exporter. And what I'm going to do is actually just generate an entire code sandbox that has a React component for each one of these operations. That includes, so you can see if I, for example, go and pause here, it's going to say you're not logged in. So this actually detects if we're not logged into the service, and it generates a React component to handle authentication for us automatically. So I'll come in here, and now let me go ahead and open up my Spotify player. And we'll play some French rap. I think that's what we're all into. And so what we'll do is, you can see it's playing over here. And if I come down and I run my pause mutation, now it's paused. And if I run my play mutation, my resume, see it's playing now. And if I run the next mutation, see I've built a whole React Spotify player just by kind of clicking around, exporting some GraphQL code, and actually generating React components that have the best practices for using our API kind of embedded. So now someone can copy and paste this, and they have a working example that they can start to tweak. And they can modify this into what they actually want without having to go from nothing to just desperate, like something kind of sort of works. So that's the first kind of step. The other cool thing is that VS Code, as of very recently, actually goes into, GraphQL actually goes into VS Code. So you can see here that if you're in VS Code and if you're in a GraphQL tag, you can actually install an extension and just run GraphQL. And it will actually open up a GraphQL instance with your query inside of there. So you can modify it and actually run it and get some data back. And then once that looks good, it'll actually modify your code right in place. So you can actually bring this tooling all the way inside of the IDE. So you actually have this as you're editing your code. You don't have to go between your code and the tooling. They're the same thing. And I know that probably what all of you were hoping for was to get a lesson on Excel. It's one of my favorite tools. So what we did after we built the Explorer was the next logical thing, which was to put it inside of Excel. So this you can point at any GraphQL server, and it renders it slightly different because we found that Excel users are not typically quite the same programmers. So we render it like a little bit nicer. But what we're doing here is we're actually hitting the Salesforce API. So what I want to do is come in here, and I want to do a revenue forecast. So I'm going to go into Salesforce, and I'm kind of clicking around, and I'm seeing what I want. I see their opportunities, and I want to pull out maybe the owner. And the cool thing is I'm actually traversing Salesforce's API, and I don't even know it. I don't care, right? I just know I want an opportunity. I want the name of it, probability, who owns it, what's their name. Because once I get data inside of Excel, magic happens, right? This is the crazy escape hatch of computation. For people who are not programmers, if you can get data in here, they can do magic. They're independent. And if they can't get data in here, you get to get data in here, right? They're going to email you and say, hey, so I need that CSV of all the users who signed up last month so I can do some sort of blah, 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 blah. But you can imagine, if you have a GraphQL API, you give them read-only access, they plug this in, and they're good to go, right? They can manage it on their own. You can enforce all the permissions and everything down here. And you can see here that Excel, I didn't even know this, gives me this crazy UI, where now I'm able to come in here and actually filter by the different values, and I can see how Sean doing versus Daniel. Daniel's doing significantly better. And I can filter based off of, whether the thing is closed or not. Like this would be a pain and a half to build a custom UI for. You don't want to have to build this. You don't want to have to get the data for this. Just give them access to a read-only GraphQL API, and you're good to go. All right. So you got your stuff going. You got your API. Things are going well. The thing is, you're not totally sure how to use the API still, right? You can explore it. The tooling is really cool if you're a programmer. But even so, you open this up and you're like, well, I know what I want to do, but I'm not totally sure where the hell inside of this API the thing that I want is. Right? I wish there was some sort of example. And the problem is a lot of people have said that GraphQL is self-documenting. And please, it's not self-documenting. It's readable by computers, which is great. And we can build all sorts of great tooling, but it is not self-documenting. Humans document. Computers read computer things. So what we want to do is make it so that, for example, in this case, I want to buy a domain on Zionts. So I can go ahead and make a little example of this. And if I want, I can share the query, give them a link so they can run it as well. It's pretty cool. But maybe what I want to do is actually contribute this as an example. So what I'm going to do is come in here and say, all right, I want to contribute this as an example. I'll say, buys a new domain. And if I want, I can include my variables, and it's going to warn me and say, hey, you're about to submit this example for the rest of your coworkers to see, or perhaps the world to see. Are you cool with that? And in fact, if I run this, and I have my variable down here, GraphQL San Francisco, something, 20,000. I'm going to run that. And Zite said, oh, and I need expected price. So that's why we need examples. So you can come in here, and I didn't fill out the exact expected price. So I'll be like, all right, well, I'm willing to pay up to $13 for this thing. So I'll go ahead and run that. And, oh, it's 12. They're giving me a deal. All right, so I'm going to say it's 12. So I'll run that. And now it's purchasing a domain. This seems cool. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, once this finishes, actually include the results in the example so someone can preview this a little bit later. And now I'm going to log into GitHub. And what this is going to do is this is going to take this example and all of its data, and it's actually going to fork my example repository from the browser. It's going to create a branch on it. It's going to submit this as an example, and it's going to create a PR to the example repository. So now it's created that PR, all from the browser. And now I have this thing here, where if I come in here, it says this example was contributed by Sean. Here are the variables. Here's the domain or the results, and here's the example. And as soon as I merge this, this is where it gets useful. This is an open source tool we wrote called Codex. You can point this at any GraphQL schema, and it will generate an entire static site that's super SEO, searchable, amenable to everything, very optimized. We have, our schema is about 40-something megabytes of JSON. It's one of the largest on the internet publicly right now. And we can come in here, and we can say, I want to search, for example, for Spotify. And it's super fast to slice through the entire thing. And if I see, for example, Spotify player, it says, hey, here are all of the examples that we analyzed. We analyzed every example that's been submitted by the community, and we looked at every field on there. And here are the examples that someone has submitted that actually reference this field. So rather than you trying to traverse your way through the graph, you can just search for examples about how to buy a domain on Zionts or how to build a Spotify player. And once you see it, you come in here, and you can just open it directly in GraphQL. And now you can generate your React components or your Bash component or whatever. So you can actually, as an API provider, solicit examples from your community, and they can actually help each other learn how to use your API. And I'll show one last one, which is more about a technique than actually a tool. But we built this tool called AuthGuardian, which is meant to make it easier to do authentication, right? Because building auth or handling auth in GraphQL is right now kind of a pain. But it's actually always a pain. It's been a pain in every system that you've ever touched, I'm pretty sure. So, but what we want to do is make it so that you could actually express, as a human, your needs for rules for authentication and authorization, right? Authentication is kind of easy. It's just, who are you? Authorization is a little bit tougher. So what are you allowed to do? And what you're allowed to do depends on kind of certain facts about you, right? Like, are you a member of my GitHub organization? Do you own this account on Salesforce, right? And those facts kind of exist out on the internet somewhere. So what we do here is we say, you can actually describe it and say, well, I want to run some rules. So whenever a user logs into any service, I want to say, run this rule. And if they're logged into GitHub, then I want to say, if they're a member of an organization called OneGraph, then on Apollo, I want you to add a server or add a role of admin. So now they'll have access to any fields that are protected by admin. And maybe on Netlify, I want to also add admin. Because on Netlify, you can actually restrict access to different paths based off of roles in your cookie. And you can see here that the JWT that's generated doesn't look anything like what you would think to do, right? Like, why would Netlify put their stuff in this structure? But it doesn't matter, because you can actually describe your rules very easily over here and then generate one token that will work for all sorts of different services. Now, the reason I bring this up is we kind of didn't write this UI. What we did is we generated this UI, right? Because every time as we add more and more rules, we don't want to have to come back to this UI and add more widgets. We don't want to have to add more inputs. So what we do is that AuthGuardian UI is actually examining the GraphQL schema, and it's extracting those fields. So you can see that just like that top level field that says on GitHub, and you open that up, and that's an input object that says, is a member of an organization called or named OneGraph. So actually what you're doing is just generating input for a GraphQL object. And what we do is we just interpret that GraphQL input object schema, and we generate a nice UI for it. So now as we modify our schema, the UI will automatically respond to that and be made available to the users. It's not always what you want to do, but actually it's pretty extensible. In particular, if you're building internal tools, this is incredibly useful. So this is like one of our internal admin tools. And we have a list of apps on OneGraph. And I might want to go in here and actually filter lots of things. And I might want to, for example, say, well, I want to see the app where the URI includes, not insensitive, blah, 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 blah. And this UI right here is also doing the same exact thing. It literally just says what are the different inputs that are possible at a given point on the schema. And let me just generate a UI automatically for that. And if you've ever tried to build some sort of Boolean logic thing where it's like, search for the things like this and this, but not this or else this, that's an incredibly painful thing to do manually. What you want to do is embed it deep inside of your API and just let it be generated. All right, and I think I'll show one last demo, just near and dear to my heart. All right, so this is Hasura. Raise your hand if you've not heard of Hasura. All right, you're part of the lucky 10,000 today. Hasura is one of the coolest tools out there. I don't understand their business model. It's open source. They seem like chumps, but it's an amazing tool. Basically, it's a GraphQL backend as a service, but you point it at any Postgres API, and Postgres is like the best API in the world, or Postgres is the best database in the world. So you point it at any Postgres database, you will get an instant, real-time GraphQL API with permissions and everything. I was super skeptical of this because I'm a backend developer. I'm super special. I am irreplaceable. What I do can't be automated. And then I built an app with this, and I was shocked. I was worried about my job security because it is really, really good. The thing is, they make it really easy also to not only, what happens is they give you a GraphQL object for every table you have in your database, but they also make it easy to pull in remote GraphQL schemas. So what we're going to do here is we have a user table. So what I've done is I've already pulled in OneGraph, which has lots of data in it. But importantly, what I have is a user table that has first name, last name, and this one, Stripe customer ID. I hate Stripe customer ID, right? Why do we have Stripe customer ID? The only reason we have that is to get to the Stripe customer. That's the only thing we want, right? We don't want the ID, we just want the Stripe customer. The thing is, as a programmer, I have to reach into that, pull out the Stripe customer ID, and go make an API call manually. And that's how I actually join Stripe's data with my data. But if you can introspect the schema of GraphQL and make it really easy to merge these two things, what we can do is actually come in here and add kind of a derived field, a magic field. It's not Stripe customer ID, it's Stripe customer. I'm saying it comes from OneGraph. And now just like that Explorer beforehand, I'm saying this is how you go from the user table over into Stripe. So you go into Stripe, you pull out a customer, and a customer is parameterized by an ID. But it turns out that every row has a Stripe customer ID. So that's where you're going to get this from. So within about 10 seconds, I've added that up. And I'm going to go back into my API. I'm going to get rid of these fields. What I'm going to do is actually join. I'm going to query in for my user. I'm going to join into Stripe and get some information on the customer, and then join in on their charges, those are their charges and their balances and whatnot. And now I'm able to actually express my entire data dependency across all these different services, including my own database. That is days or weeks of work that we can do in minutes. It is phenomenal. Integration is terrible. It needs to go away. And like, this is super exciting. And open source, I don't know. Again, nice people. I don't totally get their business model, but it's great. We should all take advantage of it while it lasts. So yeah, I think that's my talk. I have a few more demos if you want to see some afterward, but I think this is good for now. Cheers.